Hello, and welcome to the Week 7 lecture. If you've already looked ahead to Week 8, well then you probably already know that this is officially the last presentation of this term. Perhaps, depending on how you look at it, we have saved the best for last. Either way, any way you want to look at it, this is the last one we have. So let's buckle in and get this car on the road. To get things started, we'll determine when using a subquery is appropriate. We'll identify the clauses that contain subqueries. We're going to use the single row subquery and a where clause. We're going to use the having clause and the select clause. We'll distinguish between single and multi-row comparison operators. And we'll look at multi-row subqueries with the where, having, and where clause. We'll create an inline view using a multiple column subquery and a from clause. And we'll compensate for null values within a subquery. Next, we'll nest a subquery inside of another subquery, and we'll use the subquery in a DML operation and process multiple DML operations using a merge statement. By now, you're no stranger to subqueries. We've been working with queries throughout the term, but did you also know there are many different types of subqueries too? In fact, there are actually 7 distinct query types, or subquery types rather. Here we show most of the key ones. You see the single row subquery will return the outer query one row results that will consist of one column. A multiple row query, then you can see here, is it will return the outer query more than one row of results. Take a moment to read through the rest of these so you understand how each of these subqueries works. Okay, now that you've had an opportunity to read through some of these different subqueries, let's move ahead and talk more about subqueries in detail. In our past lessons, we've learned that a subquery is actually just a nested query, where one complete query is actually inside of another query. So when you think subquery, recall back to our discussions regarding nested queries. So here we have, as I noted, one complete query that's inside another query. As noted here in the slide, especially when using the where clause, some of the operators that you might want to use or include would be the equal, less than, equal to, and so on. Likewise, you'll find that the single row subquery can be used for comparison against individual data. Let's look at a having clause now. A having clause is one way that we can use a single subrow subquery. It's required when return value is compared to group data. You can also use a having clause here to insert query restrictions as needed. Notice here that query restriction we're using is the average. Notice here that the having goes into the select. Let's talk a little bit more about the select. As you see here, this select replicates the subquery value for each row displayed. A single row subquery can also be nested in the outer query select clause. As you notice here, now that we've spent a little bit of time talking about single row subqueries, let's discuss a little more advanced topic of the multiple row subqueries. Now things get a little more advanced here as we introduce multiple row subqueries. You got to keep in mind that if a single row operator is used with a subquery that returns more than one result, Oracle will also return an error message. So multiple row subqueries are used most often with a where or having clause. Multiple row subqueries generally return more than one row of results. And notice this distinctive mark. They require the use of in, any, all, or exists operators. Else you'll get an error. See here how you can add these operators with the prior comparison operators that we discussed. Here you see how we use the multiple row query. What about a multiple column subquery? Let's look at that next. A multiple column subquery in a from clause creates a temporary table. Similar to a multi-row subquery, we now move forward with the multiple column subqueries. When a multiple column subquery is used for an outer query's from clause, it creates a temporary table that can be referenced by other clauses of the outer query. In this slide, we see a multiple column query originated from a where clause instead of a from clause, as we explored in the prior slide. What happens when you encounter a null? Null values notoriously introduce unique challenges, and that is no different here when using subqueries. Generally, in subqueries, null values return no row selected, which can be frustrating for a newer user, and no obvious error message is generated. This is where it may be helpful to use the NVL function that we've discussed in prior presentations. Notice here where we've plugged the NVL into the where clause in conjunction with the select. We've talked about some of the different queries and subqueries. Let's turn our focus now to the merge statements. As we focus now on the merge statements, understandably this is an advanced concept within Oracle that does require some foundational language or knowledge. A more thorough review is encouraged, as this presentation will really only provide a higher level overview of the merge statements. What you should note from this presentation is that within a merge statement, there are a series of DML actions that can occur in a single SQL statement. If you are one of those students that instinctively flipped through the back of the book or flipped through the book at the beginning of this course, then this is the stuff in the beginning that looked just so impossible. But now that you have a better understanding of more complex SQL statements, the merge statement will begin to take better shape. Now, I know this is a somewhat dense slide, but it's going to allow me an opportunity to explain really what we are looking at in the prior slide. The following explains part of the previous merge statement. You see here the merge into, in which case the books table 1 was to be changed and the table alias of A was assigned to that table. We saw the using clause as well as the on clause. The on clause, here, the rows of the two tables then will be joined or matched based on their ISBN. You notice the when matched then, in which case if a row matched based on ISBN number is discovered, then the execute of the update action within this clause. The update action then instructs Oracle to modify only two columns, in that case retail and category. Let's look at yet another merge discussion. Here we get into merge with where conditions. What we find here is that in this expansive realm of merge statements, we can also include these where conditions. You may find that this is actually going to be especially helpful when you're attempting to narrow your query results. This is especially important as noted in an environment where there's a lot of data tables with vast amounts of return. The where, as you see here, limits that return by merging. Okay, now, hopefully that was not too painful, was it? Before we move at full speed ahead into the final area of our review, let's talk about some of the key concepts that we just covered. A subquery is a complete query nested in the select, from, having, or where clause of another query. As an administrative note, note that the subquery must be enclosed in parentheses and have a select and a from clause at minimum. Subqueries can be completed first. Recall that a single row subquery will return a maximum of one value. Also note that we looked at some of the different single row operators, and the multi-row subqueries then will return more than one row within the results. Let's continue this summary. Operators that can be used with multiple row queries include the all, in, any, and exists. Multiple column subqueries, as we noted, return more than one column to the outer query. If you use an in or equals any operator, null values returned by a multi-row or multiple column query will not present a problem. As an interesting note, subqueries can be nested to a maximum depth of 255 subqueries in the where clause of a parent query. Do keep in mind, however, no matter how expansive you get with your nesteds, a nested subquery with a nested subquery, the innermost subquery is executed first. The next level of the subquery will then be executed, and so on, until the very outermost query is reached. In review of merge statements, remember that a merge statement allows multiple DML actions to be conditionally performed while comparing data of two or more tables. Let's move on to our next and last area of coverage.